Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you. Today we're going to continue our series on firming your roots. Last time we spoke about the importance of religion and does religion even matter? And what it boiled down to is that you must be in one of two categories. You must be absolutely certain that religion is false, or you must submit to a religion. And you cannot be in some limbo category between the two. Because if you're just 50% sure that religion is false, you have too much to lose if religion is actually true. In fact, if you're only 99% sure that religion is false, that's still too big of a risk, because that 1% you have too much to lose. What I'm not asking you to do, of course, like I had said in the previous episode, what I'm not asking you to do is, therefore, you must submit to a religion because it's risky otherwise. No, rather, you must you must search for religion. You must be ala bayyina. You must be upon clarity and upon surety. Either you're sure that religion is false, or you're working towards, or you're upon some sort of religion. So please do check that out and its resources for more details on that matter. So the second point is this matter of this algorithm which I'd mentioned. And it boils down to as follows. Either atheism or theism is the correct position. And what's quite important about this matter is that once you rule out atheism as an option, you enter this realm of theism and you understand that God exists. And so then it's just a matter of, okay, what is our relationship with that God? And what is the true religion, if any? And while you might find that as of late there's been a lot of discourse regarding atheism versus religion, the truth of the matter is that the case for atheism, while it looks pretty and intellectual on the surface, it is a very weak position. What I very strongly recommend, and like I've said in the previous episode, please do not skip the resources which are down in the comment section. So a beautiful read on this concept, on this topic of atheism is the book by Hamza Tzortzis, The Divine Reality, God, Islam, and the Mirage of Atheism. It is a beautifully written book. It is wonderfully detailed. Really, it explains in a very robust manner how, while atheism may seem intellectual on the surface, it really is a mirage. Right below that paper-thin surface is a mountain of flaws. And so let's start with a few. The few points which I would use to rule out atheism, at least for me, goes as follows. Firstly, the fact that you can't have a logical discussion with an atheist, and that the mind is not reliable in the atheist's worldview. And this point is quite amazing, and it's not popularly known, and I'll explain it in a minute. The second point is the point of God being a logical necessity, that the existence of God is a necessary logical conclusion. The third is the argument from design, which, regardless of the noise which goes about, really I feel like this is one of the most beautiful, and it's really the strongest proof for the existence of God. And the fourth point, while it's not exactly a proof, it's a point which must be taken into consideration, which is the lack of objective morals in atheism. And actually it can be used in a proof if used correctly. And so the first point is this point of not being able to have a logical discussion with an atheist because the mind is not reliable in an atheist's worldview. So I'll read a section from the book which really summarizes the point nicely, and there is a link to the book below. It is free. It is a free PDF. They don't want anything from you. I don't want anything from you. We just would love your benefit. So I'll read from it, and I quote, "Firstly, our ability to distinguish between truth and falsehood is not a requirement for survival. Secondly, achieving mental insights is also not a requirement for our continual existence. Evolution is about the ability to strive, not about the ability to make logically valid conclusions. Finally, our ability and desire to discover, which is a necessary feature of a rational mind, is often detrimental to our survival." The author then goes about to explain each of these points, but I would summarize it as follows, using one of the examples that he had used as well. What is the source of a functional mind? In a worldview which does not submit to a good God. Let me repeat that. What is the source of a functional mind, in a mind which works? What's the source of a mind which works in a world which doesn't have a good God? And so atoms and explosions and heat and energy, blind cold matter, blind in the sense that it does not have a will of its own, and cold in the sense that it is not conscious. Blind, cold matter. Where does intellect come out of that? There is no source for intellect in that. And so what is the source of intellect? One might say, all right, it's part of the evolutionary process. That evolution led to us having intellects and having reliable minds. And this is well known to be false. It is unanimous that evolution does not lead to truth. It leads to survivability. And so one of the examples is that, all right, a bunch of cavemen see one of the cavemen eat a red fruit, and he dies. Therefore, those cavemen who saw him are going to avoid everything red because they have absorbed this fact that red equals poisonous, red equals harmful. This is the fact, quote unquote, that they have ingrained within themselves. Then comes along a red insect or a red butterfly or whatever, and they avoid it like the plague because of this quote unquote truth that they have that red equals poisonous. However, that red insect or butterfly or whatever is not poisonous. So that truth, that fact for them led to increased survivability, therefore increased reproduction, and those are the ones that will be more fit and survive. While this example is a bit rough around the edges, it explains why evolution does not prefer truth. It does not give preference to those things which are true. It gives preference to those things which lead to survival. And so with those 2 points, the source being blind, cold matter, and the fact that evolution is not a explanation regarding the source of intellect. So therefore, the brain and the mind do not lead to truth in the atheist's worldview. So if we're going to discuss with an atheist, within an atheist's worldview, we're not going to reach the truth. We're not using minds which can reach the truth because nothing says that, there's nothing that says that what we're saying and what we're arguing about is actually true. Therefore, there's no argument to be had from the get-go. There's quite a bit more to be said about this concept, and it's a beautiful concept. Please do some reading about it. I strongly recommend, once again, checking that link in the description below. The book is, once again, it is a free PDF, and it's not a dodgy link. Rather, they themselves are giving it out for free as a downloadable PDF. It is a best-selling book, available on Amazon as well. And as well, this is not some sort of fringe opinion, like I'd mentioned. Francis Crick, the discoverer of DNA, mentions that, and I quote, "Our highly developed brains, after all, were not evolved under the pressure of discovering scientific truths, but only to enable us to be clever enough to survive and leave descendants." And Sam Harris as well, an outspoken atheist and neuroscientist, what he mentions is that, and I quote, "Our logical, mathematical, and physical intuitions have not been designed by natural selection to track the truth." Furthermore, on this point, biologist John Gray mentions that if the human mind has evolved in obedience to the imperatives of survival, what reason is there for thinking that it can acquire knowledge of reality when all that is required in order to reproduce the species is that its errors and illusions are not fatal? A purely naturalistic philosophy cannot account for the knowledge that we believe we possess. And the author continues, "In summary, when atheists claim to have used their rational faculties to prove that God does not exist, it is a form of intellectual hypocrisy. To account for the fact that they have a rational mind, they have to deny atheism, or deny reason itself. The intellectual irony is that their ability to reason is best explained by the existence of God." And that is that. So this was the first point, that you can't therefore have a logical discussion with an atheist because the mind collapses in their worldview. The reliability of the mind collapses in their worldview. Now the second point is God as a logical necessity. Simply and beautifully put, in Surah At-Tur, in the Quran, there is a certain argument which is mentioned in that surah, that أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ أَمْ خَلَقُوا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ بَلْ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. That were they created from nothing, or did they create themselves, or did they create the heavens and the earth? Rather, they have no certainty. So one cannot be created from nothing, a philosophical zero, a total nothing. If you claim that something can arise from nothing, this is absurd. And what would prevent some things to continue to come from nothing? There would be nothing strange to just walk down the road and for pineapples and watermelons to spawn and despawn at random, and it would be totally fair game if you believe that something can come from nothing. So there must have either always been something, and there wasn't nothing at any point in time, or that there is always nothing. And since we see that there is something right in front of us, therefore the only option that remains is that there was always something. And that something is not the universe, because we know that the universe had a beginning. Therefore, what began the universe, that is what we call God. That is what we call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alright, so if you weren't created from nothing, the other option is that you create yourselves. And that doesn't make any sense at all, because you would have to have not existed so that you could exist, so that you could create yourself, and you had to be existing at the same time so that you could create yourself. And those two things contradict with each other, therefore this option is obviously not true. A lot of these points are quite obvious, but when the obvious is questioned, you have these kinds of discussion. And of course, I don't mean at all to be condescending, but unfortunately, this really is just the case. The only option that remains is that they had been created by someone else. Who was this someone else? Let's leave it at that. The next point as well is that أَمْ خَلَقُوا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Okay, so leave yourselves. What about all of what is around you? The heavens and the earth. The universe which is around you. What created that? Where did that come from? Did it create itself? Was it created from nothing? Once again, absurd. Therefore, something must have created the universe. The next point I'll mention is this point, the argument from design. Now, like I said, this point is, from my point of view, the strongest and the most beautiful. Get yourself out of the spirit of argument and the back and forth debates. Really, the simple matter of fact is that we see something which looks complex to any kind of degree, we assume that something had created it. One would never assume that a mobile phone spawned autonomously. This universe is extremely complex. Your body is extremely complex. Therefore, there's a question, why is it like that? Because that's really how we live our day-to-day life. But, alright, aside from that, let's shift it a bit. Why are things one way rather than another way? So, remember the example that I'd mentioned in the previous episode, that when you press your fingers together, this is an amazing proof to the existence of God, because why is it that the laws of physics are the way they are? Philosophically and logically, they can be another way. It is not incoherent to think that they could be another way. Incoherent means a square circle. It is a contradictory idea. It is not a real thing. You cannot have a square circle, because you can't have something which is fully round, that has no angles, but at the same time it has 4 angles. It does not fit. However, having different kinds of physics, in which instead of my fingers pressing against each other, they would phase through each other, who got to say that it should be this way rather than another way? You would say, oh well, actually they're not touching. They're actually on the level of, on the atomic and subatomic level, it's actually electrons which are repelling from each other, and that's the reason why they're not phasing through each other. Well, why does negative and negative repel? Why are electrons repelling? Why doesn't it just phase through each other? Who said it should be this way and not some other way? And you can apply this to all the fundamentals. There's nothing which is logically necessary about any of the laws of physics. Therefore, why should it be this option and not some other option? One would say that, okay, you're claiming that there are options. Well, you're claiming that there are no options. Why should you claim there are no options? It philosophically is coherent for there to be other options. This is one matter. Now I'm going to go down the point which I love about the details of what actually happens, and consider that if you saw an etching in a rock, you would say, this is a ruin, this is some ruins from an ancient caveman who scraped it into the rock, or something like that. If I see detailed vessels in my fingers which carry red blood cells, which carry oxygen to the cells, for which they use in their metabolism to produce energy for my cells to continue to live, for the cells to work together, for the organ to work together, for that organ to work in a system of organs, for my body to function. For all of these things, why? What's organized? Who's planning all of this? Yeah, who has planned all of this? And what is the ultimate purpose of my body? Or is it just blind? Is it no process? Is it no purpose? Well, everything below this has had a purpose, or it's working towards some purpose. So what is my purpose as a collection of organs? And what I love as well about this example of pushing your fingers together is that there's so much going on. Just you think of that idea that I want to push my fingers together. Your will begins that process, which starts an impulse. So your will, whatever that is, triggers an impulse in the motor part of the brain. That travels through an electric impulse, which what it is in reality is a bunch of salts, so sodium and potassium, rushing through the membrane of the neuron, and this happens in a sort of continuous like fashion, which causes an electric signal to travel across the nerve, and that would go from the brain and connect onto a nerve body on the spinal cord, and the connection between the two nerves happens through these tiny vesicles. At the ends of the nerves there are tiny bubbles which contain certain chemicals, neurotransmitters, which when the electric signal reaches the end of the axon of the nerve fiber, it triggers tiny gates to open, which allows calcium to come in, which connects to these vesicles and causes a change in them to trigger them to push out their neurotransmitters. These tiny chemicals then travel onwards to the dendrite of the next neuron, and the electrical impulse resumes, and that nerve fiber goes ahead and travels all the way forth to muscle fibers, and there are millions of muscle fibers which would make one muscle. And so you have that happening here, and you have that happening here as well, for me to be able to push my fingers together. And furthermore, what's actually happening when the electrical impulse reaches the muscle, the interface is another amazing matter. That same idea of the neurotransmitters, they touch onto the muscle fiber, and this triggers the most amazing thing. It triggers a release of calcium. It connects to a certain part of the muscle fibers. The muscle fiber is one piece, and it's not just a one piece. It's made of a bunch of subsections, and these subsections, each of them have actin and myosin filaments. So when the calcium rushes in, it causes a change in the configuration of the actin and myosin filaments, and it causes them to get closer to each other. And this getting closer on one segment and another segment and another segment along a long string, which is this muscle fiber, cause it to get shorter, and this getting shorter is a single muscle contraction, and that's this contraction right here that happens on one finger, and the same thing is happening on the other finger, and we're able to push that together. And for this to be a precise push, by the way, there's a whole fiasco which is going on in the cerebellum, because otherwise, if it wasn't, forgive me, I'm from a medical background, if the cerebellum wasn't functional, you wouldn't be able to do this. You'd be going like this, and you wouldn't be able to put in the correct calculations. It's a whole complex, it's a mind-boggling process. If you want to see more about these examples of the amazingness of what you are made of, I highly recommend the book. Surprisingly, it's a book on intelligent design, which is highly recommended by Nobel Prize winners in biology and in physics. And the book is called Foresight. It's written by Professor Marcus Eberlin. Foresight, How the Chemistry of Life Reveals Planning and Purpose. And please do see it in the link below. There's a beautiful short YouTube video in which he mentions a few examples from the book, and it is absolutely amazing. So I've mentioned thus far that you cannot have a logical discussion with an atheist because there is no value to the mind. There is no grounding to the mind in an atheist's worldview. Nothing says that the mind should lead to the truth in an atheist's worldview. Therefore, no discussion. And the second point is this point of God being a logical necessity, and you can't have something from nothing. Therefore, you must have something from something which has always existed. And we know that this universe had a beginning, therefore something had to cause its beginning. And that beginning is God. A God which has existed forever and did not have a beginning. Definitively, the uncreated creator must be the start of any existence after that. By definition. And the third point is this point of the argument from design, as well as the argument from why this, not that, as well. Why is there something rather than nothing is similar to this point as well. And I'll conclude with the following, that think of the worst crime that you could possibly commit. Let your mind run wild. The worst, most terrible, most disgusting kind of crime that you could think of. All right? Good. All right, so you feel disgusted by that. It ought not to be done. It is a terrible, terrible crime. So, I don't know, cooking children alive and then eating them. You abhor it. This boiling feeling within you, the existence of this within you and within everyone must have some sort of source. Someone who has coded it into us to hate these things. You must have an objective morality from that point of view. But even without using that as an argument, and let's not use it as an argument, as a point of evidence. Let's just use it as, hey, heads up, this is what atheism leads to. That most disgusting and most abhorrent crime that you thought of it's not actually bad in an atheist's worldview, because, hey, it's just bad in your view, but someone else might think it's all right, and to each his own, and ultimately it doesn't really matter. Like, if you cooked a child alive and you further proceeded to eat him, it's just a rearrangement of atoms and an exchange of energy. Ultimately, there's no meaning to it. And in the atheist worldview, there is no meaning to anything in life. An atheist will, if he is coherent, understand that there is no meaning to anything at all, and the only way that someone can actually stay sane in that worldview is if he deludes himself to think up some purpose for himself, which is the equivalent of make-believe. That I create a purpose for myself is I will pretend to have a purpose for myself. Just like a child pretends to be a cowboy, or a little girl pretends to be a princess, but it's nothing more than making pretend. And this is a really depressing situation to be in. And this is what atheism necessarily leads to. A coherent atheist would be in this situation at best, and in severe depression at worst. And so these points and many others, you'll find them in that book, The Divine Reality, God, Islam, and the Mirage of Atheism. And as well, I strongly recommend the series, The Journey of Certainty by Dr. Eyad Qunaibi. It is absolutely beautiful. Make sure to turn on the English subtitles if you don't understand Arabic. And it goes extensively upon these and upon many other arguments which really cement this idea. And this is not an idea. The existence of God is ultimately not an idea which needs really that much argumentation. You might think, therefore, it's some complex thing that needs some deep philosophical knowledge. No, it's really simple. If you ask me, does the sun exist or not? I'll tell you it exists. Why? I don't need to go into intense philosophical debate with you. The sun exists. I see the sun. I feel the sun. The sun exists. I feel the effect of the sun, the heat. I see the effect of the sun, the light. Therefore, I know the sun exists. I can see its image, the image which is projected as a result of its light. So I'm just seeing its causes, therefore I know the sun exists, just like I know that God exists when I see the creation around me. But once someone starts debating with you and telling you, okay, that might not be a sun, that's just maybe an illusion, maybe that's just some massive light bulb, prove me that I'm wrong, this is just some massive light bulb, it's an optical illusion, there's actually heat from other sources, it starts to feel like debating with a flat earther, really. So the truth of the matter is that to know that God exists does not take the amount of time this video took. Rather, it's a lot simpler than that. However, as goes the saying in Arabic, one of the most difficult of difficulties is trying to clarify that which is already clear. And so, And so this is what I wanted to share about the matter. In my shoes, with these arguments, atheism is entirely ruled out. And this is far beyond what is needed for a person to go to the next step, which is that, okay, God exists. I've ruled out atheism, therefore God exists. Now we're in the realm of theism. All right, which of the options of theism should I take? What we are here for is the roots. And once you firm the roots, therefore, no wind can blow your tree down. And this is our beginning. This is our starting point. Bismillah. In the name of God, we continue. And I wish you all the best. I really don't want anything from you. All I want, sincerely and honestly, I just want what is good for you. My goal is for people to seek God and for people to seek their purpose, to seek nearness from God. That is my entire purpose, and that is what I hope for. I wish you all the best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.